Seven Elemental Forces, a book with 7 4-color block prints and 12 hand-carved text pages, by Roger Peet of Portland, Oregon. The artist says, "This artist's book was created in my home studio in Portland, Oregon during the first winter of the global COVID-19 pandemic. It is imagined as a field guide to the future, describing 7 elemental forces that future generations will have to learn to live with in a changed and changing world. Each of these forces is illustrated with a 4-color reduction linocut and is accompanied by a quote from a contemporary person responding to their effects. The introductory and concluding texts and the covers are also hand-carved linoleum blocks, and the entire work was printed on Vandercook 3 letterpress in an edition of 25. Ghost Light Theaters, a risograph printed in gold, blue, and brown by Rachel Phillips of Pacifica, California. Ghost Light Theaters is a book in 3 parts. Each booklet in the set creates a narrative cinematic experience like a silent film. Broadly, these books triangulate between photography, film, and theater, 3 mysterious and evocative dark spaces where, paradoxically, stories are captured and retold through light. The title of the work comes from the theatrical term ghost light. A ghost light is a single bulb left illuminated near the center stage when a theater is unoccupied and would otherwise be completely dark. Superstition holds that a ghost light provides opportunity for the resident ghosts of the theater to perform on stage when everyone else has left for the night. The Road West, Ancestor Self-Portraits and Poems, by Anna Redwine of Columbia, South Carolina. This artist's book features charcoal drawings, ink, vellum, heirloom buttons, and thread. The artist says, "This book is part of an interdisciplinary collaboration by Julia Johnson, the poems, and Anna Redwine, the drawings. The poems and the drawings consider our own experiences of a shared childhood in New Orleans and the trauma and displacement of Hurricane Katrina. Look back through the imagination of our ancestors and farther back through millennia to our very distant past. Through this intimate investigation, we seek to illuminate the connection between people through time and to stimulate present-day empathy for today's immigrants and displaced people. Each drawing is an ancestor self-portrait, both a literal self-portrait, drawn using a mirror, and a searching lens into the self-lives of past generations. The poems explore the formative relationships between family and place. Together, it is a document of transformative human connection and an object of hope." The Mollusk, a cast and dyed artist-made paper and letterpress printing, by Amy Richard of Gainesville, Florida. The mollusk is a response to centuries-old ideas. Liber Naturae, the Book of Nature, an idea tracing back to generations of philosophers who considered the natural world a source of limitless text to be studied as a symbolic repository of divine wisdom. Created entirely with artist-made paper, the interior pages embrace a miniature letterpress book of prose by the artist, meditations gleaned from the elegant text of the humble pen shell. The work is housed in a handmade box by Ellen Knudsen. Strata 8, an altered book by Catherine Robinson of Henderson, Colorado. Catherine says, "Strata 8 is part of a series of books that mimic the strata layers visible near my home in Colorado. Strata is the layers of rock that are compressed by time and are visible when pushed back up through tectonic shifts. They tell the story of the earth, much like a book." The Enchanting Desert, a limited edition artist book by Laura Russell of Portland, Oregon. Laura says The Enchanting Desert is a kaleidoscope book celebrating a recent relocation to the Sonoran Desert in Tucson, Arizona. After 30 years of marriage spent living in majestic locations ranging from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Northwest, suddenly, surprisingly, we find ourselves transplanted, totally entranced by the beauty of this enchanting, miraculous desert. This creative structure opens into a circle, attaches with magnets, and then rotates like a kinetic kaleidoscope. 3 panoramic desert vista photographs showcase the Santa Catalina Mountains of Tucson, Arizona. The images are paired with an original poem, a love story to both a man and a desert. Winter Stayed Late, an artist book of felted wool, sheep locks, handmade cotton paper, pins, and twine, by Aaron K. Schmidt of Rochester Hills, Michigan. The artist says, "I created this book after experiencing a miscarriage, and with it gaining an understanding that women are too often not given the grace to outwardly mourn such a devastating loss. In this book, text is printed onto handmade cotton paper and caringly pinned onto each hand-felted wool blanket-like page. The narrative humbly describes the hopeful expectation of a new baby with the coming spring. As the tiny blanket pages turn, so does the text. Seemingly emotionless words describe a sudden miscarriage and the need for wool for the burial of a baby. The repeated text on each page, 'Winter came early and stayed late,' signifies the monotony of a long winter that pushes on unknowingly and without care. The few words demonstrate the quietness that surrounds miscarriage still today, and a mother's silent pain as she is left to mourn alone." As the Crow Flies, by Aaron K. Schmidt of Rochester Hills, Michigan. A robin's nest, robin feathers, paper, vellum, twine, and ink comprise this artist's book. This artwork examines joy, loss, and complexities that lie within both when they so often intertwine. As the Crow Flies consists of 3 miniature books housed in a robin's nest. When closed, the books are eggs. When opened, feathers fan out, and the books become chicks soon to fledge. Each flag structure is slightly different, allowing the feathers to move in varying ways, wings set to take flight. Fragmented images of crows are repeated throughout the 3 books. They are the beaks and feet of feeding. The 3 books are covered in a delightful decorative paper of songbirds and flowers, but the subtle text inside reveals that the chicks were taken and eaten by the crows. In what may seem like the cruel forces of nature, the circle of life carries on with one more meal for the crows. Tea Party, a book of brewed tea bags with tea, brewed tea bags empty, and string, by Aaron K. Schmidt of Rochester Hills, Michigan. 196 cups of tea, 196 cooling breaths across steam, 196 moments of eagerness, of hopefulness, of relaxation, of anticipation, of worriedness, of sadness, of hesitation, of calm. 196 Twinings tea bags were brewed and sorted by color to make this book. 36 tea bags have been left intact with the exception of the paper tag. The remaining 160 tea bags have been disassembled and emptied, each revealing its own unique set of lines and markings left behind while drying. They tell the story of 196 cups of tea. Fractured Fathers, by Rachel Simmons of Orlando, Florida, with Benjamin Reinhardt. This artist's book is a collapsible box with archival pigment and pressure prints and vinyl labels, archival pigment printed flex angles, and pamphlet book. Fractured Fathers is a collaborative artist's book created by Benjamin D. Reinhardt from Appleton, Wisconsin, and Rachel Simmons from Orlando, Florida. The process began with a conversation between close friends about their complex relationships with their fathers, Jim and Terry. In the summer of 2020, during the first pandemic lockdown, they interviewed one another over video conferencing and transcribed the conversations. Their discoveries led to the creation of 2 Flextangles with a third collaborative book based on the transcripts. For the Flextangles, they used photos of their fathers augmented through digital manipulation and pressure printing. Through this process, they found kinship between their common experiences and parallels between their family relationships and themselves. Particulate History, an artist's book of handmade paper, typewritten text, monotype, and relief prints by Rachel Simmons of Orlando, Florida. Particulate History, a double accordion featuring polar imagery and visual poetry, was inspired by the scientific method of harvesting historical climate data from the Earth's glaciers by drilling and extracting long frozen cylinders called ice cores. Air pollution, volcanic glass shards, greenhouse gases, and industrial chemicals circulate across the planet and become trapped within air bubbles in the ice, preserving samples of the Earth's atmosphere over hundreds and thousands of years. Scientists can travel back in time by studying these layers of frozen time, allowing them to measure and date volcanic eruptions, rising carbon dioxide emissions, temperature fluctuations, and even fallout from thermonuclear bombs. Fluorescence, a flag book by Maddie Bryce Smith of Woodstock, Georgia. Maddie says, the flag book Fluorescence is an artistic representation of living with chronic illness and finding solace in nature. Fluorescence is defined as the process of blooming. This book represents my symbolic prayers through nature, hoping that I am also undergoing a transformation of healing and blooming like my flowers. Details include hand-cut floral silhouettes, pressed forget-me-nots, and end sheets made of handmade paper with zinnia and snapdragon seeds as inclusions. On the spine side, my poem reads, "Some days, the only thing I can manage is to sit in the garden. I take care of my flowers, wishing for them to grow and flourish, hoping as a silent prayer that the universe will take care of me. That same hummingbird often visits. It's as if the universe speaks. Hush, my child, let your mind rest." Transformations, an artist's book with pressure prints and screen printing by Stephanie Smith of Decatur, Georgia. Stephanie says, in an effort for understanding and to determine their course in the world, humans have often used images and rituals to help define truth. As an artist and a visual storyteller, I explore universal themes of memory, loss, time, chance, and change, and my work is a processing and reinterpreting of experiences and observations of both the natural world and emotional world, using a personal visual iconography that reflects and suggests rather than illustrates. I Was Taught to Be White by Denise Stevenson of Oceanside, California. An artist's book featuring paper, bookboard, ink, PVA, and magnets. Denise says, I am privileged to live in white skin. The 3 outer walls of the pyramid box show 3 ways of imagining a white person. A blank canvas with no words, pretty, pretty white, and white privilege, white complicity, white supremacy. Inside, a variety of hues imprinted with handmade stamps indicate the complexity of culture and ethnicity no one can see on the surface. An equilateral accordion-folded triangle book sits inside the box. The book, I Was Taught to Be White, provides 3 race-based vignettes. 2 tales illuminate how I was raised to be white, while a third shows the ongoing struggle for cultural humility to call out racism when I encounter it. Picnicking, an artist book by Naomi S. Velasquez of Pocatello, Idaho. Naomi says, "This book references creativity and the spirit of play in our communities. The text is inspired by a day that my nieces filled a dry erase marker board with their description of the joyful sounds of the process. I titled it Picnicking since my grandfather knew that my sisters and I were strong spellers and would ask us to spell all of the trickiest words he could think of every time we saw him. He would always be so proud when we spelled them correctly, even though he asked us so often that we had memorized his list." Questionnaire for Two Pussies, an artist book of letterpress printed by Tom Virgin with Maureen Seaton, Denise DeMel, and Mary Malm of Miami, Florida. A Questionnaire for Two Pussies is the second of 5 books examining South Florida's cultural landscape and issues. Questionnaire for Two Pussies is funded by an Oolite Arts Allies Creator Award. This book comes from collaborating poets Maureen Seaton and Denise DeMel's long-term conversation around feminism and their shared experiences. Virgin worked with painter Mary Malm to create a visual story paralleling the conversation in poetry to support this compelling feminist treatise. Tom Virgin printed all of the images in conversation with Malm and the poets, bound and covered the book in a laser-cut maple veneer wrapper. Seed to Fruit Pod book, an eco-dyed, eco-printed rag and handmade papers artist book by Marama Warren and Sharon Armistead of Milton, New South Wales, Australia. This collaborative book evolved over a period of many months. The artists began by eco-dyeing papers, making eco-prints using leaves and bark of Eucalyptus cinerea, and tested the results using various mordants. Then they experimented with different book structures and settled on the pod shape as the ideal vessel to carry their message of transformation. The text reads, "Seed, shoot, leaf, flower, fruit. Pods are the vessels that contain the seeds of transformation." Timekeepers, an artist book of eco-print with eucalyptus leaves, wax oil monotypes with ink by Marama Warren and Sharon Armistead of Milton, New South Wales, Australia. In the forest, transformation is happening all the time. Leaves fall and tree rings give us a visual record of time passing. This collaborative book by Marama Warren and Sharon Armistead aims to honor the process of transformation in nature by considering a forest over time. The text reads, "Inky grasses brush dark hills where scattered trees hold memories, count centuries, imprint history in their annual rings. Roots of wood and stone bind deep the silent scriptures, ancient stories, climate records safe within." Bark Beetle Book, Volume 14, Ars Datum Est, an artist book by Susie Wolf of Seattle, Washington. Susie says, "I am preoccupied with climate impacts on forests. Hiking through forests burned and yet to burn, I observe hieroglyphic scribing of bark beetles on bark and sapwood. The winding marks seem like a script I can't read, as if their trails, called galleries, are undecipherable cryptograms. A book, after all, is a collection of messages. Incorporating natural materials becomes a meditation on those materials' disturbing beauty as well as an opportunity to learn. Beetle kill is a compound by climate change. Trees stressed by heat and drought are vulnerable. The beetle's larvae no longer freeze in warmer winters. Reproduction rates soar, tipping populations from endemic to epidemic.